Hello, today I will be discussing the LED. An LED quite literally stands for a light emitting diode. Diodes are something we went over in lesson 18 of the course material, and today I will be giving a brief overview of how they work and why they are so important. Why do we need LEDs? Before LEDs, a majority of our light came from incandescent light bulbs. These light bulbs worked by driving current through a filament in the middle of the bulb, usually made out of tungsten, until it heated up and emitted electromagnetic radiation. Although these light bulbs were successful at producing light, they were extremely energy inefficient. Only about 10% of the energy given to these bulbs were actually converted into light that we could see, and the rest was converted into heat energy. So what if there was a way to produce light that was extremely more efficient? That's where LEDs come in. If we take a look at the structure of an atom, we can see that the outermost shell that has electrons in it is known as the valence shell. As we bring multiple atoms close together to form a solid, each atom's outermost shell and energy shell begins to interact and spread out into large ranges of energy levels, which we call bands. The outermost band that has electrons in it forms the valence band, while the next available energy level that has no electrons in it is the conduction band. This brings us to discussing band gaps. Now, the band gap is the space between the uppermost part of the valence band and the lowermost part of the conduction band. As displayed by this diagram, we can see that in conductors, the two bands actually overlap. This allows electrons to freely travel between the two bands. This is why when we connect a power source to a conductor, we actually have current flowing fairly easily because it takes no energy for these electrons to flow between the bands. However, in insulators, we can see that the band gap is actually quite large. This takes a lot of energy to excite an electron to actually bridge the gap. This is why if we connect a power source to an insulator, we generally do not have any current flowing. In semiconductors, however, we can see that the band gap is present, but it's relatively small compared to insulators. This requires a lot less energy to excite an electron to pass the band gap. As we've seen previously, semiconductors, although they have small band gaps and require relatively less energy to excite the electrons to bridge the gaps, semiconductors by themselves are still not the best conductors. We can increase the conductivity of a semiconductor by adding impurities into their solid structure in a process known as doping. For example, if we take silicon, which has 4 valence electrons in its outermost shell, and we add a phosphorus atom, which has 5 valence electrons in its outermost shell, that one extra electron, known as the free electron, is responsible for carrying the charge. Since this electron has a negative charge, we would call this type of semiconductor an N-type. If, however, we chose boron, which has one fewer electrons than silicon, we now see that it creates a hole in the structure. Generally, we give this hole a positive charge, and so we call this type of semiconductor a p-type. Now, if we take a p-type and n-type semiconductor and we put them together, we begin to see an interaction where the electrons from the n-type semiconductor bridge the junction and begin to fill the holes in the p-type semiconductor. This begins to give the p-type semiconductor a negative charge as it accepts more electrons, and as the n-type semiconductor is losing electrons, it begins to take on a more positive charge. This process continues and creates an electric field. Eventually, the electric field will become so large that it prevents the electrons from crossing over the junction. This creates what is known as the depletion region, an area in the junction where there are no free-moving electrons. Now, if we take this p-n junction and connect a power source to it, such that the positive side of the battery is connected to the p-type semiconductor, and the negative side of the battery is connected to the N-type semiconductor. Note that this is also known as a forward bias. We begin to see the electric field decrease, which allows the electrons to once again cross the junction from N-type to P-type. Now once this electron has passed over the P-type, it wants to travel from the conduction band to the valence band so that it can exist at the lowest energy level possible. Now once the electron bridges the band gap, the energy loss from the electron can be emitted as a photon and seen as visible light. Now the wavelength of light emitted by the p-n junction is a direct function of the size of the band gap, or the energy loss by the electron bridging this band gap, which can be expressed in electron volts. We can use different types of materials to produce larger band gaps, which will in turn produce smaller wavelengths or different colors of visible light. Aluminum gallium arsenide was the material that produced the first red LEDs. From this energy chart here, we can clearly see why the red LED was the first to be produced, as it requires a smaller band gap than green or blue. To make green or blue, indium gallium nitride was the material used to make these LEDs. Note that although indium gallium nitride is used for both green and blue LEDs, to make a blue LED, a better quality crystal structure is needed than for a green LED. Fun fact, it took almost 30 years after the first highly efficient green LED was produced to make the first highly efficient blue LED. Once we had blue LEDs, white light was created by taking a blue LED and covering it with a yellow phosphorus material. LEDs are all around us, from the computer screen you're currently watching this video on, to the lights in your car, to agricultural applications, and even medical devices. They are helping us save energy while lighting up the world. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned a little something about LEDs and the electrical engineering that goes into them.